If you're an HR professional who works hard to fill roles within your company, keep employees engaged, and build company culture, welcome to America Back to Work, where dreams only work if we do. We'll share wide-ranging issues surrounding pre-employment background screening, HR topics such as recruiting, hiring, labor trends, and company culture, as well as broader HR-influenced business topics such as customer experience, service level excellence, and protecting what matters through best practices in prevention, protection, and corporate security. America Back to Work is brought to you by S2 Verify. Here's your host, Arnette Heintze.
Welcome to America Back to Work, brought to you by S2 Verify, where our purpose is to help you hire with confidence and manage insider risk. I'm your host, Arnette Heintze. Thank you for joining. Today, our guest is Pavithri Kilgore. She's the owner of KPSK Consulting, where she focuses on comprehensive HR consulting in employment and labor law, risk management, compliance, and developing HR policies and procedures. She has over 20 years of experience working in HR, and she's here today to talk about one of her specialties, risk mitigation. Pavithri, thank you so much for joining us today. And as we get started here, would you mind sharing a little bit more about your career and how you got really focused into HR risk management?
Yeah, thank you for having me. So, funny enough, I was actually going to school to study and become a prosecutor. And about my junior year, came to the conclusion that criminal law was not where I wanted to go. And my dad was a judge, and he's the one who said, go into employment law. And I was like, I don't want to be a corporate attorney. Mm-hmm. And he talked me into trying it out and doing employee relations at a time when companies didn't even have HR. And he just basically looked at me and said, "What are you afraid of? Go start one." And that's what I did.
Fabulous, fabulous, fabulous. So as, all of us that have, HR responsibilities in organizations, the landscape of employee law changes, constantly. Mm-hmm. Can you give us an overview of where things stand today and what are some of the more pressing issues HR leaders, face today and what's driving this regulation?
I think the pandemic opened our eyes to things that were hiding under the surface that are really pressing and coming up now. And we feel like we're on a hyperdrive to change everything and fix everything right now. I think that has a lot to do with why states are getting so involved in employment law faster than we've seen in the past. I think a lot of what I'm seeing coming out is around accommodations, the Pregnant Worker Fairness Act, the NLRB's on a very aggressive agenda to overturn, reverse some of the employer favorable decisions. Ban the box, AI are all things that are coming out of the current environment we live in.
Well, you just mentioned a topic that is near and dear to my heart and all the hearts at S2 Verify, which is ban the box.
Yeah.
Why don't you kind of give our audience a little bit of background about the spirit of ban the box laws and what are some of the unintended consequences that you've seen emerged from this issue?
So I think the spirit is pretty simple in that it's meant for employers to consider a candidate's qualifications for the position before taking anybody's criminal background, if there is one, into account, and then making sure that everybody has a fair and equitable chance to be eligible for positions.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, what I've seen happen mostly is that employees aren't aware as much on what states require as far as regulation above and beyond federal law on types of things they can and can't look into when it comes to a employee's background. A lot of small businesses don't know to look for it. And a lot of times what ends up happening is a simple question as, do you have a felony in an application or a policy that says we don't hire anybody with a felony can have costly unintended consequences in the wrong state.
I think you're right. I think there's so many businesses, especially small businesses, that just don't have the insight and experience to know what is legal and what is not in this process. So what recommendations can you provide our HR pros out there to, how they can avoid the risk around ban the box laws and, contributing to any unintended consequences?
To me, it is do the right thing, whether it's a law or not, right? I think it's very simple and not very time consuming for employers to actually just implement it. Don't ask those questions on your application.
Mm-hmm.
Only run the background check post-offer pre-employment. And then if something does come up, do an individualized assessment to see if there is a correlation between what's on their background and what the actual job is, or if there's even a risk level involved for the company or the employees if this individual's hired. It doesn't take a lot of extra time. And quite frankly, it puts you as a better employer in the eyes of the candidate from the get-go and sets you apart from every other employer that is just doing it because you're required to do it.
Yep.
So do it for the right reasons.
That's a good rule to live by for everything.
I'll bet.
So when it comes to pay transparency, regulations tend to focus on transparency outside the organization, posting salary ranges, correct? So how are those regulations holding up, and what other compliance issues can come up around pay transparency?
Yeah, so it's not just about posting salary ranges or salary for a particular job. There are certain states that actually has very specific laws that says you can't ask a candidate about what are they making right now.
Mm-hmm.
Employers will use what they're making currently to determine what they're going to pay you when they join your organization. So there's a lot of states taking that step in place to say you can't even ask that question anymore.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I have seen, again, I mainly cater to small businesses that don't have the resources. And it's something that I have seen small businesses get caught up on and end up in fines more often than they want to.
Yeah. So let's switch the topic and go, what about pay transparency within the company? Who should have conversations about the company sharing employee salaries internally? HR or management? And how can HR pros communicate about this topic to employees?
The word itself says the answer, right? Pay transparency. I think it's a combination of HR and management. Mm-hmm. I'm a very big proponent of salary being transparent and salary bands being in place for every job title. And it should be posted to an intranet or somewhere the employees can get to. If they have to go ask you, hey, what would my salary be if I apply for this position internally? There's something missing in your company as far as communication is concerned, and employees understanding their ability to move and grow within the company. But if that is out there for everybody to see, if I get X job, here's the low end of that salary band, here's the high end of that salary band, and that's somewhere within my comfort zone, I'm already taking that anxiety out of the rest of my career pathing. Be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to training HR professionals and how they can best stay compliant with regulations around hiring, what training recommendations do you have for HRs and their managers so they can keep this risk low?
Stick to the salary band. Talk with HR to understand why the salary bands are set the way they are.
Mm-hmm.
And use things like the cost of living adjustment if it needs to go outside for specific cities where the cost of living does need to change from what the salary band may be, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm out of Indianapolis. It's not going to cost the same for somebody doing my job in Indianapolis to make do as it would for them in New York City. That has to be taken into account. So have those honest conversations before you even start the interview process. And then don't ask those questions like, what are you making now? And make calculations in those terms. Make the salary decision black and white on paper based on qualifications of that individual for that position in that company.
Right.
Take all external factors out of it.
Yep. So let's broaden our conversation and go to the trends that you're seeing in labor relations and unions in general. And, there's so many current issues going on today. But why don't you give us what you're seeing as trends?
Last year there was a 53% increase in union representation petitions filed with the NLRB. It's like a huge jump from before the pandemic.
Yeah.
Employees are more vocal about what they want and what they deserve. And companies that don't have a union need to understand that they're not immune to it. They're actually probably more of a target to unions than the unionized workforce. And I think educating business owners and leadership around what that looks like and following the NLRA is going to be the key to kind of keep everybody happy on both sides of that.
So right now we've got two very high profile, unions and strikes going on. We've got the recent issues with UAW and the motor companies, and then you've got the Hollywood strike going on with the writers. What insight can you offer to HR pros to pay attention to as these stories continue to develop?
You need to pay attention to what your employees are saying. Don't do employee engagement surveys for the sake of doing them if you're not willing to actually listen and implement any issues they bring up. Right? Between those two, like the common theme there is wages. More pay in both cases. And AI is the driving factor with the Hollywood strike. Both of these strikes are going to cost the economy billions of dollars. And scary enough, UAW is only doing a targeted strike right now. If they don't come to an agreement soon, that's going to get a whole lot more expensive real fast.
Yeah, I've heard some highlights on the news that come this Friday, if they're not any closer, it could really escalate. So
yeah, they're thinking about adding like 2 to 3 more sites per company. So that's going to get.
So what kind of training would you suggest for HR teams when it comes to union issues? What training is best suited for them?
It's about employee relations. And employee relations isn't just about investigations or employment law or anything like that, but it's really about understanding where the employee's fears are, and then the employee understanding how that creates a risk. Employees don't go looking for a third party if the employer is actually paying attention to what you're saying and is working towards addressing those concerns. Think about the employee that makes 99% of the complaints that come out. Don't dismiss them. Don't be that person who goes, oh, it's so-and-so making another complaint. Because the minute you stop listening to that person making another complaint, they're going to go find somebody that will listen to them.
Yep, absolutely.
Teach your managers on what to listen to and when to engage HR. Making sure that they don't say or do something that they are not 100% sure they should be, and making sure that you're getting them the right resources ahead of anything even being in the horizon.
Yep. So, Pavithri, what happens when companies get into trouble, by not staying compliant? I'm sure you've got some stories that you could share around that line, but what insight can you give us there?
I mean, let's be honest. There's an alphabet soup of government agencies waiting to come figure out what you've done wrong, right? And 99% of the time, I don't think any employer gets up in the morning and goes, today, I'm going to go discriminate against these people. Like, that is not what we do as human beings. So 90% of this happened because it's unintended. They don't know it needs to be in place. And I don't care how small your business is or how large your business is, have that core group of people that can advise you to make sure that they have your back and they protect your investment. One of my clients, unfortunately, ended up with almost $100,000 fine for not filing the right reports with a government agency because they just didn't know they were supposed to till I started working with them.
Mm-hmm.
And government agencies don't care why you didn't do it. They only care that you didn't do it. And that is where your investment is going to go if you don't get in front of it.
So let's say you've got a crystal ball there at KPSK and you're looking into the future, going into 2024. What trends do you see coming out of employment law? And so any particular insight you have there?
I think there's a few things coming out, right? Outside of what we've talked about today is like leaves, more leaves. And then there's going to be more leaves because states and localities are leading the charge on this. Where federal laws not catching up, states are going to implement it. So you need to know what's happening in your state, in your backyard, and make sure you're putting those in place as soon as they come out. Non-competes, be careful. The FTC is on this huge rush on trying to ban non-competes altogether. Some states are already there. And AI, it can be a double-edged sword. It can make life easy for you. It can also have unintended consequences. I mean, look at the Hollywood strike. It can put your company at risk.
Yep.
I think those are things we got to really pay attention to going into next year. And I think the states are going to be taking a lot more of an active role in employment law, even more so than the federal.
That's really great insight. Especially the thoughts you have around non-competes, because I've seen a little bit of conversation on that as well, and I can see that actually getting some good holding ground here. So
yeah, it's gaining some traction for sure.
Pavithri, before we sign off, I have a question that I'd like to ask you, and I ask every guest here. It's if S2 Verify were to conduct a background investigation on you, would there be any surprises?
I mean, that depends if you can get me to sign off on the paperwork first, right?
That's a very good response. And I will tell you, you're the first one to bring that topic up. So that is a good point. That's so good. So Pavithri, I want to thank you so much for spending time with me today and for sharing your expertise. I know it's one that, many smaller businesses will benefit from. And where can our audience keep up with you and keep track of what's going on at KPSK?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn, and you can also get in touch with me through my website, kpskconsulting.com, or you can just email me, Kilgore@kpskconsulting.com.
Great. Thank you so much. And before we sign off today, I'd like to have a minute with my partners, Bill and Jim at S2 Verify. So Bill and Jim, I really appreciate you guys taking time today to have this conversation. And I'd like to ask each of you, just where we start off here, how did your career path bring you to the background screening industry? Bill, why don't you start us off?
Sure, Arnette. I actually started right out of college in the background screening or the employment screening industry with a company called EMSI, which was a paramedical company that did urine collection. And in fact, one of our first clients was the Secret Service, so I'm sure that we collect urine at some period in time. Then I moved into the background screening industry in 2002 and had joint ownership for it and choice points. So it's basically been my whole career.
Yeah. Jim, how about you? Where did your career path start?
Not that much different, really. My days in this space started back at Equifax, but not on the credit bureau side, but on the data side. Equifax, probably most people don't know at that time, was in the background screening business. And we did investigative auto reports and investigative property reports. And so I kind of got an early introduction into data, analytics, risk assessment, and kind of just kept on moving forward from there.
Yeah. So let's take a look back at those years where we were working for others. And Bill, if you look back, who do you think the most effective manager that maybe you had in the late 80s, 90s, and early 2000s might have been? Because we've been on our own here building the business since 2009. So if you reflect back, who do you think was one of the more effective managers that you had, and why?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's a guy named Dr. Lowell Foster, who had a PhD from Med. He was the CEO of MedExpress, which was a drug testing laboratory in Memphis. He was not only extremely brilliant, but most people that are that smart don't have any common sense. And so this guy actually had a lot of common sense. And so he spent a lot of time with me, just molding me and, accepting me as who I am, and really made me into the, executive that I am today. I mean, he taught me a lot about financials and acquisitions and just a lot of different things. So he was a extremely gifted individual.
Yep. Great. Jim, how about you?
I would tell you it was probably a tie. Early in my career, in the world of selling, there was a gentleman in New York City who I had the pleasure of working for. His name was Frank Robinson, not the baseball player, but name equivalent. And he probably, Arnette, was one of the most polished, professional individuals I had ever encountered. His approach to people, his approach to problem solving, his respect for business and others, process, et cetera, and really began to understand, how you approach others professionally and the image you want to portray and how you portray it. And then a little later in life, and Billy can relate to this, I ran into this chief operating officer known as Doug Curling. And Doug and I to this day remain great friends. But what I really took away from Doug, probably the most balanced, low-key, effective manager you'd want to meet. And Doug had a saying, Billy and I use it to this day, which is every time you would encounter difficulty or encounter a problem, Doug would sit back and go, look, just work the problem, right? Because you want to get all hyper and all excited and the wheels are coming off the cart, and he would sit back and go, just work the problem. One step at a time, work the problem till you're done with it. And that has stuck with me for a long time in terms of Billy and I, we do this every day. Just work the problem. You try to keep your, for lack of a better term, your temper in control or your excitement in control and just work your way through it. So those two guys, probably the biggest influence on me.
Yeah, that's great. It reminds me back to over my career, I also had a number of great mentors, but one in particular is when I was leading the Secret Service Public Affairs program, and the assistant director I had at the time was a guy named Terry Samway, and he had a motto of no surprises. And, I kind of think about that concept every day. And it's like, don't give clients surprises, don't give your employees surprises, don't give your loved ones surprises. And so that's a motto that I think is worked well for me. For our audience, please tune in next week when we talk about developing trust among employees and increasing retention by cultivating transparent leadership cultures with Sharon O'Donnell. We'll see you then. And it goes without saying, let's get America back to work, because dreams only work if we do. Pavithri, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
If you want to stay abreast of HR, recruiting, and hiring trends, tips, and tools, make sure you subscribe to America Back to Work. If you enjoyed this episode, leave us a rating and a review.